You are now listening to the Grio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Welcome, comrades, to the final episode of Harlem and Moscow Red Flags, the official companion podcast to our audio play, Harlem and Moscow. I'm Regina Griffin, the executive producer of both the play and the companion podcast. With me is my griot comrade, Sam Riddell. Sam, I feel like the Meshropom official right now.
Welcome, Negro comrades. Welcome to the Soviet Union.
We're just saying goodbye, not hello. So Sam, Dorothy West thought she was going to Moscow for a few months to make a movie. She came back 1 year later. That's the same thing that happened with our production of this podcast. What was supposed to be a few months, and here we are more than a year later, wrapping this bad boy up.
It has been a long but fulfilling journey, and I'm so glad that we're finally here and we finally presented this thing that we've been working so hard on to the world. I'm proud of us.
Yes. I'm so happy that we are at the end too. But the first time I read Alle Mims' amazing script, I knew I wanted to know more about the story. I knew we had to produce a companion podcast to have experts come on and tell us who are these people and why did they go to Moscow and what was it about this time and this period that made traveling to the Soviet Union so appealing to Black people. We've had some of the top experts in the world on red flags breaking all this down. So check it out. You'll see Sam's episode, Sex in the Soviet Union. It's really good stuff. We've learned a lot. There's a scene in episode 1 before they set sail where Langston Hughes says, "We need to take a picture."
Oh, Louise, we need a picture before we sail.
You are the man. Gather round.
And then Louise starts gathering everybody around. Come on. Take this photo. The first time I saw this real photo, I was mesmerized. Like this group of young, gorgeous Black people about to take the trip of their lives. So Sam, I've got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Having produced the play and all the subsequent research that went into putting this together, which person on this trip do you identify with most?
That's a really fun question. So I think I'm gonna take a cop out. I'm gonna say a blend of two characters.
Okay.
Because I'm definitely like Mildred Jones, sort of like, let's get into things, let's dip and dabble, no attachments, let's have fun. But also, I really love traveling, and I travel by an itinerary, like to the T. And I'm definitely the one who's wrangling folks around. So there's a lot of Louise Thompson in me too.
Yeah, for me, it's Louise Thompson Patterson. No doubt I'm Louise Thompson Patterson. Here's historian Tanisha Ford on Louise Thompson Patterson.
Louise Thompson, later Louise Thompson Patterson, is not an artist, but she's working closely with people like Langston Hughes, who becomes one of her best friends, and Zora Neale Hurston. She works for one of their patrons. So she works as a secretary, transcribing a lot of their work, doing that kind of secretarial work, the behind the scenes work that matters. She grew up in California, member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. For some people that might really be a big thing to note. She's a mentee of W.E.B. Du Bois. She becomes an activist in college. She then goes off to Hampton Institute, for example, and she's a professor there, among other places. And she's really supportive of the students who are protesting against this very patriarchal system within the HBCU system at that time. And she's really disaffected with what she sees as this white leadership of these Black institutions. She moves to New York City, where she almost immediately becomes interested in labor issues and Communist Party politics. She's one of the few people on the trip who actually has a legit tie to the CPUSA, the Communist Party USA. So she is definitely deeply rooted in a political base and foundation. She also cares about the arts. So I love that she's like a bridge figure between the Molly Moons and the Dorothy Wests of the world and the Langston Hugheses and, some of the other visual artists of the world too.
Yeah, I can totally see myself trying to get Panama and Michael Harriet and Christina Greer to go on this trip. I'm like, come on, y'all. We're going to Moscow. We're making a movie. Jay Ivy's going. Tari Teray's coming. Y'all need to come too. I totally see myself doing it. And I think I could get most of them to come. I think a few of them would tell me no. But I think
I see
most
it
of
too.
them come along with me to Moscow.
I see it too. I think that's why we work so well together on this trip, kind of corralling people across the continent and at different times and space. Yeah. We're two Louises putting this little thing together.
No, that's great. And Mildred Rhodes, like Mildred is so chill. Like, love Mildred. She's just like, I'm going with the flow. I'm not worried about a thing. And
Wish I could have met her. We would have been good friends.
So when we started putting together the companion podcast, we started looking for descendants of people who went on this trip. And to my delight and surprise, not only did we find a descendant, we found the descendant of the organizer of the trip, Louise Thompson Patterson. We found her daughter, MaryLouise Patterson. We were all fangirling when we got to see and talk to MaryLouise. I mean, she was so kind, so generous with her time. Sam, I know you read her book as part of the research in this trip.
Yeah, that was incredible. After the play, I was already fangirling, and then I fell in love with this book, which is basically these very intimate letters between Louise and her later husband and Langston Hughes, and kind of like the gossip and the shade and all this kind of stuff. She put together an amazing book that kind of encapsulated the time. It's a really good supplement to this play.
Yeah, she's just fantastic. So we are so proud to present to you our conversation with descendant MaryLouise Patterson and playwright Alle Mims.
Well, thank you again for being here. This is incredible. I am a little speechless. I mean, I just wanted to start out by saying that so often people, and I'll include myself, we think of this as sort of like ancient history and like, oh, it happened so long ago. And so to speak to the daughter of someone who I have spent the last 2 years researching, it's kind of just brings it so into the present and the now moment. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you so much for joining us for this.
I'm happy to. Yeah,
incredible. Well, I mean, I love your mother. It's been an honor to tell just a small chapter, literally a chapter of her story. I think I would love to start with I think one of the questions I mentioned, which is, what was it like growing up with your mother sort of in this middle of this social circle? Were there other people who went on this trip to Moscow that you had a chance to meet? Was she still, holding salons and things when you were born, or what was that like? Who were the people who were sort of around her while you were growing up?
What was it like growing up with my parents? I would say it was really wonderful. First of all, they were older when they had me. So they were already grown up, and which is not the usual way, and it's not totally unusual, but most parents were much younger, maybe even 2 decades, as much as 2 decades younger. And in terms of my dad, maybe even 3 decades younger, and having children. So my parents were already established, adults, well established adults, and having lived very exciting lives. And in some ways, I think maybe I was kind of, not that I wasn't as exciting to them as the first part of their lives and the middle part of their lives, but it may have been a little bit anticlimactic to have me at the point that they did in terms of all that they had done prior to having me. So, my mother was in her early 40s and my dad was in his early 50s. And by that time, my mother wasn't, the Harlem Renaissance was long gone and long over. So those kinds of salons that that were held very often all over the place, uptown, downtown, in the city at that time, were not happening anymore.
Hmm.
This was now the McCarthy period, and so people who were openly identified as either being members of the Communist Party or fellow travelers,
Hmm.
sympathetic in any way to the Soviet Union, um, were not, were a persona non grata. And
Hmm.
I don't know whether you know or not, my father was in prison during that
Mm.
period. So they weren't having those kinds of salons.
Mm,
But
makes sense.
there were people who they knew, particularly Black actors and writers, who, because of racism, because they didn't have entree to Hollywood or to Broadway, and if they had inclinations in that direction of progressive politics or progressive ideologies, still were to a greater or lesser degree um, were in the larger circles, and my parents were in their larger circles. I'm
Hmm.
thinking of like Harry Belafonte and
Hmm.
Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, and then later on Bea Richards, although she wasn't an actress at the time. So these were people who were not in the Communist Party, but who I guess one would say were in the larger progressive movement in terms of their ideologies, whether they were active in politically or just active through their craft, applying their craft. Um, so they knew people like that. And uh, there would be dinner parties, and children stayed up to a certain hour, and then
Yes.
you would shoot off to bed. I knew these people as a child. I didn't know these people as someone who was really kind of functioning on their own and thinking for themselves, and so I can't bring that um understanding, that experience to the conversation. So yes, I knew Langston. He was Uncle Lang to me. I knew Paul Robeson. He was Uncle Paul to me. But again, I was a child. But growing up with them was because they were older, I wasn't babied. I was, they weren't down on the floor with me, doing
Mm.
building blocks. And, I was given books. I was reading. I was going to meetings, political meetings. I was going to demonstrations. I was in marches. Um, I was in the office. I learned how I don't even know if you know what I'm getting ready to say. A mimeograph machine. Um,
Yes.
do you know what that is? Yeah, I
Yes,
was
I've seen it in movies.
right, right, right. Well, yeah, I mean that was my upbringing, was actually in activism, in their activism. I was introduced very early. And then my father went to jail, so we visited him in jail. So I knew very early on that my parents were considered dangerous, anti-American,
Hmm.
because they were anti-American, and that what they believed in was um, anathema to what we allegedly the United States said it was all about. And yet, my parents were great people. My parents were wonderful people, and I loved them. And I believed that they were the best people, walking the planet, and that their friends were the best people walking the planet too. And they talked about freedom, and they talked about liberty, and they talked about a world where my dad would say, all the Mary Lou's have enough to eat and a roof over their head. And I thought there was nothing wrong with that. To this day, I
Absolutely.
don't think there's anything wrong with that. So
Yeah.
so there was this kind of contradiction where outside my house, in school, on the radio, um, my parents were the enemy.
Mm.
And so so my parents' enemy became my enemy.
Mm.
And that was while I was still, not really thinking for myself. And then when I came of age and started thinking of myself, I said, they sure are my enemy. So,
Double down.
so then they really became my enemy. I mean, at that point, they were my parents' enemy, but then they
Mm,
became mine. But my parents also embraced me in other ways. For instance, we did family activities like a lot of other families. We played Scrabble. They taught me how to play cards because they were card players. They played Honeymoon Bridge. They taught me how to play bridge and pinochle. And we played Scrabble. We were a big Scrabble family. But those people from the Harlem Renaissance, with the exception of Langston, um, I'm trying to think who else. There was no one else by that time that they were still in close contact with. And
mm-hmm,
in some cases, like with Poston and Moon,
mm-hmm.
um, by that time, there was a big a schism between
Right.
the NAACP and the Urban League and the
Mm,
traditional Black socio-political leadership and anything that had to do with the Communist Party. So they weren't socializing at all with
mm,
any of those people. And then people like Dorothy West, I mean, she kind of went her own way. And some of the other people kind of faded, into the woodwork. And then there were those who stayed, a couple who stayed on, in the Soviet Union. So,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
um, yeah, from that group, that was really a group that was cobbled together. They weren't friends before they went. These were just people who just kind of individually came to responded however they responded to this announcement that there was this opportunity, and they got the $90 and they
Mm-hmm.
went. So these weren't people that had any connection to one another beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there was, as there was the big divide there.
Yes,
um
yes. As to
and
the trip ending.
so
Mm-hmm.
right.
Wow, things changed so quickly, and for me, I spent so long just in the early 1930s that I'm just now I feel like I'm branching out and sort of trying to link, between the 1930s and the 1960s. So that's really great. But
But
reminded,
remember, we went through the 50s,
yeah.
and if you read that period of the 50s and the Red Scare, it
Mm-hmm.
was real. I mean, it was very,
Absolutely.
very, very real. The same is for people of Muslim or Arab descent, right after 9/11, and the fear mongering and the creating of this atmosphere of hatred and you know um, that the othering, and the other is the devil, and you got to kind of exorcise them from your life and from your country, and you know um so there was a real pall over this nation, and McCarthy and McCarthyism extended way beyond McCarthy's life, way into the 60s. And yeah.
I mean, I feel it even now. I mean,
Yeah, it's a
it
resurgence.
and even in telling people about this story, there are times that I hesitate to bring up the communist aspect, even though it's obviously so important, and that's who was behind the trip, and obviously the Soviets were sponsoring a lot of it. I still feel when I call certain people on the trip communists, or even, as you said, fellow travelers, sympathizers, I almost feel like I'm condemning them, even in death. Like I'm not allowed to call them a communist because they never got their card, because they never specifically said they were a communist. And there are times when other people will say to me, oh, this is a great, story about communist history. And I find myself sort of like shrinking away from that, of hesitating to say that, even though it absolutely is. And, I agree with you 100%. There's nothing wrong with wanting equality for people, housing for people, food for people, clean water. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But we've just, as Americans, had it drilled into us that those desires are anti-American. And I remember when I first started my research, I found your mother's FBI file, and it just kind of blew my mind that
Did you
I
get the
was
whole
like,
file?
yes, it's on the Internet Archive. Well, a lot of it is blacked out.
Right.
But it's on Internet Archive, or at least it was the last time I checked. This was probably 2 years ago at this point. It was very early on. Actually, I downloaded it. I have a copy of it in my digital files. I could totally send it to you.
Oh,
Um,
please.
I will. I will. It's there. Like I said, there is definitely a lot of redacted information. I didn't end up using that much of it, but it definitely mentions the trip, and I believe I found Langston's FBI file as well, and it just goes to show like how deep this goes, and how the government was so against these things, and it's so. I don't think we as Americans really understand the plots that were hatched in order to stop this movement and continue. Like you said, there's been a resurgence and to continue to stop it. Also, I read that you spent some time in Moscow studying as well. I'm interested in what brought you to that decision, what it was like there for you, and if you saw any similarities to what your mother experienced while she was there.
So briefly, you're going to have to. I should say I'm supposed to be writing my memoir, so you'll have to buy the complete version.
Okay.
This is abridged. So I went off to the Soviet Union in 1960 after I graduated high school. My father had gotten his passport back after having it lifted 9 years earlier in 1951. Revoked, not yeah, revoked in
Mm-hmm.
51. So he had gone off to he went off on a trip. I was told that he was in Europe and that he was in Paris, which he had been. When he left New York, he flew to Paris, and or maybe flew to London and then went to Paris. But anyway, he had gone to Paris, and that my mother and I were going to join him. And meanwhile, I had applied to Oberlin College and a couple of other
Mm,
colleges, and Oberlin had accepted me, but I there was no money, and my
mm,
parents didn't have any money. So, I was going to go to, I guess, Brooklyn College or City College when I after that summer. But we got to Europe, we got to France and Paris, and I don't recall exactly how we learned about the opening of this new school called um, People's Friendship University in Moscow, and
mm,
that they were looking for students from all over. And by that time, when my mother and I got to Paris, is when I found out that my father was in the Soviet Union.
mm,
And so Khrushchev had made this announcement about this opening of this school, and that students from prior colonialized and current colonialized countries were being were going to have the opportunity of coming to the Soviet Union and studying, and then going back to their countries, skilled, learned professionals in whatever fields they studied, and so that they could build their own countries, or help build their own countries.
mm-hmm.
So this announcement was made by him, and my father was not at that meeting, but he was in the Soviet Union at that time, and he had been sent by the Communist Party to the Soviet Union. So he was meeting with officials within the Communist Party and the government. And
Wow.
but meanwhile, we were in Paris, and I didn't know any of this, right? I
Yeah.
didn't. I mean, I knew
Right.
he. By the time when we got to Paris, then I was told that he was in the Soviet Union. But before we got to Paris, I didn't know that.
Mm,
And so we were in Paris in 1960. This is during the Algerian Revolution and
mm,
their revolutionary struggle for liberation. So it was a very heady time, and here I am, an impressionable 17-year-old, and very much pro-revolutionary, very much, down with colonialism, down with imperialism, and there was just a lot of hope in the air, and a lot of organizing and a lot of rebellion and resistance to an old order that people were trying to put us under. And so that's when I got to Moscow. I wound up staying because first of all, I was excited. To go to school with young people from all over the world was, an opportunity that one could not, in one right's mind, say no to. So, I stayed.
I love that. I didn't know that story that that y'all went there together
Well,
as a
yeah, I went with
family.
my mother, and then my mother had not been there since the 1930s.
Right, right. I didn't know she went back at all.
Yeah,
Wow, that's incredible.
yeah. So she revisited a number of the places that they had gone in the 1930s. Yeah,
Right. Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Did she say that they had changed
Oh,
very
yeah.
much?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure.
When they went to Tashkent,
Mhm.
the Russians had just helped the Uzbekis establish a language, a written
Oh
language. That is,
wow.
I'm sorry, a written
Mhm.
language, not an oral language, a written language. And they established schools and universities in Tashkent and throughout Uzbekistan, and then of course other republics as well. Um, and women were allowed to go to school, and women were allowed to take off the burqa, which now there's a lot of debate about the burqa and its pros and cons, but back then
Mhm.
it was seen as a relic of the past and
Yes.
as an oppressive practice.
Right.
Um,
The big
so
unveiling this
unveiling. So the unveiling was a
mhm.
was a big to do, and trials were held where fathers and brothers had actually killed their young women because they took it off.
Mm.
So they got to go to some of those trials, back in the
Mhm.
1930s. So
Wow.
she goes back, 30 years later and sees tremendous transformation. Um, Not only are women in school, but women are, heading up departments and heading up government, departments and writing books and performing on stage and in hospitals doing operations and et cetera, et cetera. Stuff that 30 years older was only imagine, in the realm of the imagination of what could be. And now she was seeing it in real life. Um, yeah.
Wow. That's incredible to go back and see that type of progress.
Mhm.
Um, I understand you studied medicine,
Mhm.
and then went on to be a pediatric doctor, correct?
Mhm.
And I read an article that I believe you wrote, and I just saw it got me thinking about the different roles within the movement, within a revolution or a resistance,
Right.
and how you as a doctor were working against oppression in a similar way that your mother was while she was in a courtroom or a counselor, things like that. And I loved reading about your work at Attica prison, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how medicine for you was like your road for resistance, for the movement, for uplifting the Black community, and how maybe your mother influenced that, even though you didn't walk the same exact career path as her.
Allie, I never I never really thought of it that way. Back then, my girlfriend was here today, and her parents were also members of the Communist Party, so she's a red diaper baby like me. And
Red diaper baby. I've never heard that before.
you never heard that term? Yeah, so you're too
No,
young.
that's
We were
beautiful.
called red diaper babies. And
I have to write that down.
and we were talking about that time. Anyway, I'm older. I'm a month older than she is, and so
Mm,
um about those of us who were red diaper babies who embraced our parents' ideology and the path that they took, and other red diaper babies who did not. In
mm,
fact, were very angry and disappointed and turned and walked the other way in the exact opposite direction. So, in terms of being a doctor, early on, there was a group that came together around medical aid for Cuba.
Mm.
So, there were various and sundry times that there were groups of doctors in the country who, were progressive, varying degrees of progressive, and who, being doctors, used medicine to show solidarity, to be in solidarity with communities, poor communities in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. Um,
Mhm.
Going to Nicaragua early on after the Sandinista Revolution, going to Cuba, and so I was a part. I was a part of those, but I also, I think one of the things my parents, one of the what most wonderful gifts they gave me was a love um, for Black people, for all oppressed peoples, but that's kind of a nebulous. But Black people, I knew. I was one. And a love for our people, a real profound, genuine love for Black people, for our culture and and our culture as a weapon, our culture as survival for us. Um, I'm indebted to them for that. I really am. And so to use medicine to encourage young Black children and adults to study medicine, to study science, to discover themselves, their own bodies, how they work, to try to excite them,
Mhm.
instill some excitement in them. So, I did a lot of that, and talking in schools to kids, and then in my office, or in the office, not my office. I never owned any. I never owned anything, um, any medical practice, but in the office, to make sure that I told every Black child that as a patient, how beautiful they were, to make them feel that I really cared, and that they were, as Jesse Jackson was wont to say, they were somebody. They were
Mhm.
somebody worth caring about,
Mhm.
and spending time with. Um, so, that's really kind of how I plowed my field. Um, and then more recently, Physicians for a National Health Program, which is a national organization in New York. We are the Metro New York chapter of the Physicians for a National Health Program, and then also being a part of the New York Health Act and fighting for, you know, on a state scale,
Mhm.
universal health care for at least the those of us that live in New York,
Mm.
including people who, and you may never have heard of this, and that's one of the problems, but there is a New York Health Act to fight for universal health care. I mean, it is a right. Every human being should be entitled to the basic necessities that make life livable, make life possible. And to not do that, and to say intentionally, we are not going to do that, you know, um, is is inhumane. It is certainly amoral, and it is, in my mind, criminal. For my father, who was rather, I mean, I never saw him as such, but other people say he was a little rigid, maybe tending towards dogmatism sometimes.
Mm.
Um, the world was divided into, I guess, if you were religious, you could see it as good and evil, and then you'd have to define who's good and who was evil. But
Mhm.
he saw it as, you were either for the people or you weren't for the people. You
Mhm.
were for yourself. And he was always for the people. So, as I said, I embraced what they believed to be those values, that understanding of the world, and my place in it. Um, I got from them, and I embraced that. I believe that, and I have tried to pass that on to my children. And in talking to anybody, I've tried to say, it's about us. It's not about me. It's about
That's
us.
beautiful.
Yeah.
That is so beautiful. I love that. I
And
mean, you're getting me fired up. Now I got to go look up the health act, see if I can do anything on the
please, yes,
ground.
you can. Yes, you can do something. And,
I'll
and
look
you
it
too,
up.
Regina, and you too, Sam.
Wow. I think that is definitely a career highlight for me.
Same. Same. That was fantastic.
It was great. And it's a great way to end our series. So that wraps up Harlem and Moscow, Red Flags. Thank you, Sam, for doing such a tremendous job on this project. I want to thank all the experts who helped us better understand the significance of this trip. I want to thank the cast and the crew. I want to thank everyone on the Griot Black Podcast Network team, past and present, who made this project possible. Thank you for support, and until the next adventure.
Bye.